On today's episode of The Franchise, today is Tuesday, January 10th, 2023. And in this episode, we're going to go over the college football playoff national championship game between TCU and Georgia, in which Georgia easily dominated TCU, single-handedly took care of them with a 58-point win in the national championship. We'll talk about that game. We'll also go over and take a look at the way too early top 10 college football rankings for next season and talk a little bit about the next college football season. And then Carlos Correa is back in the news. So we'll talk about him potentially signing with a team for reals this offseason, as he's apparently signed with a few other teams, but it's all fell through. So he's back in the news. We'll see if that happens. We'll talk about that towards the end of the episode. And just before we get into it, The Franchise is available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. So whether you watch or listen to the podcast, it's available on all of those platforms. Make sure you subscribe, like, follow, comment, share, all of that. But let's get things started with the college football playoff national championship game between number 3 TCU and number 1 Georgia. And Georgia took care of business in this game with a 58-point win, taking down TCU 65-7. Georgia completing the back-to-back national championships, first time since Alabama did it a few years back. And now Georgia will look next season to have a three-peat. But first, we'll start with this. TCU had no shot at winning this game. Going into it, there was no way they were going to win. And the fact that there was conversation that TCU could have gone out there and beat Georgia is simply hilarious, because Georgia is the best team in college football. Obviously, they just won the title. But they are miles ahead of TCU in terms of talent. Georgia always has one of the top recruiting classes. They have one of the best coaches in the sport. They have the best defense in college football. They have a great quarterback. They just have a great program. And they are miles ahead of TCU in terms of talent on the football field. So there was no way that TCU was going to be able to go out there and take down Georgia. It was just not possible. TCU had a great season. They went from a team that was being unranked to start the year to being in the national championship game, taking down a Michigan team in the semifinals, who was considered by many to be a top 4 school in terms of overall talent in the country. I know they were ranked number 2, but I mean, if you really look at what are the 4 best teams in college football, I don't know if you put Michigan in the top 2 talent-wise. The records, I know the rankings, whatever. But now there's the conversation after this performance by TCU last night, and where they only scored 1 touchdown, 7 points. They were done. The conversation is they shouldn't have been in this game. It should have been Alabama. And although Alabama versus Georgia college football national championship would have been way more competitive, it would have not have been a 58-point win for either school. It would have definitely been a closer contest and a more enjoyable game to watch the whole way through. That is facts. However, Alabama did not deserve to make the college football playoff this year. They did not do enough in the regular season to earn one of these 4 spots to make the playoff. They lost to Tennessee on a field goal, which they should have won that game, but they missed the field goal. They lost to LSU in overtime. They almost lost to Texas. They beat some other schools, but a lot of the argument for as to why Alabama should have gotten into the playoff is because they lost close games to top-ranked opponents. But Alabama didn't have the resume during the regular season to get into the top 4. So TCU earned the right to be in the playoff, and they earned the right to play in the national championship. I mean, they destroyed Michigan. They stomped Michigan. They made Michigan look horrible. But they stood no chance against Georgia. I know if it was an Ohio State just played Georgia, and it was a very close contest. Ohio State almost won that game. If Alabama played Georgia, close game. If Michigan plays Georgia, it might be close. But TCU never stood a chance, and TCU did deserve to make the playoff. I know Alabama, Alabama would have had a very competitive, awesome, fun game to watch against Georgia if they were playing each other. But Alabama did not deserve or earn the right to be in the playoff. Even though they are one of the best 4 teams in the sport, during the regular season, they did not do enough to earn themselves a spot in the playoff. Just looking at the box score from the game, the two of the top 4 Heisman finalists were playing in this battle. Max Duggan from TCU, he had 2 picks on the day, 49 QBR. He didn't play great. And if TCU wanted to win, they would need Max Duggan to play great, and he didn't do that. Georgia's defense is incredible. Stetson Bennett played amazing in his final collegiate game at the age of 25. 4 touchdowns, 99 QBR, 304 yards, 18 of 25. What a great game for him to go out, national champion back-to-back. In terms of when he will be drafted in the NFL draft, or if he'll be drafted for that matter, I think if I were a team, I would draft him. I would draft him 5th, 6th, or 7th round in the draft. Obviously, he's not one of the top QB prospects. He's not a Bryce Young or CJ Stroud. But if you're a team, there's always teams that draft these quarterbacks in the 5th and 6th and 7th round. So I definitely think that's when he'll get picked. We'll talk about the NFL draft later. But Georgia really stood out. They performed amazing in this game. I mean, Brock Bowers, 7 receptions, 152 yards, and a touchdown. McConkey, 2 touchdowns. Donnie Mitchell with a touchdown. Stetson Bennett also rushed for a touchdown, too. So 2 touchdowns, not just 1. So Georgia easily dominated TCU in this game. TCU stood no chance, but looking ahead to next season, we'll start with these 2 programs first before we get into the way too early top 10. Where will TCU be next year? I think the short answer is they won't be in the playoff. It's still going to be a 14 playoff next year. And they had a great year. They had all the cards fell in the favor of TCU this season. But when you look at the talent on their roster, they will not be in this position next season. I don't think they will be. They could be a ranked team, but when you look at the Big 12 with Texas, having Quinn Ewers, having a possibility of Arch Manning at quarterback, you look at Kansas State, who won the Big 12, despite TCU being in the playoff. They won the Big 12, Kansas State. You look at Oklahoma, Baylor, Oklahoma State. All of those teams could have the possibility, because the Big 12 is a very deep and competitive conference. All of those teams have the possibility of winning it. And, a Texas could have the possibility of making the playoff and taking the spot away in the spot that TCU was in. TCU won't be back here next year, but for Georgia, they will be the number 1 team ranked in the country going into the next season. And the expectation for them is to three-peat. They should go out there and win all of their regular season games. I mean, their schedule for next season, I'll have to pull it up because I just saw it earlier. And there's no way Georgia loses a regular season game next season. It's just not going to happen. They play absolutely nobody during their 2023 regular season. So the expectation is they go in to the college football playoff and three-peat. I think they are the favorites to do that. So we'll get into the top 10, way too early, top 10 rankings. We'll definitely do these in a few months, many months, once we get closer to the college football season. But recruits have signed, transfer portals, basically a lot of the top guys have transferred. So the top 10 right now heading into next season in college football. My rankings. Number 1 team in the country is Georgia. Back-to-back national championships, best defense. We'll see how good their defense remains next season. They have the 2nd best recruiting class in the entire country. They are the best team in the game, best team in the sport. I think it's close. It's definitely close between them and the other two teams in the top three. Georgia, by and large, is the best team in football. Number 2 is Alabama. Despite not making the playoff this year, they have the number 1 recruiting class. They have a lot of guys coming back that are some of the best players in the sport. And oh yeah, by the way, they have Nick Saban, who's the best coach in college football. And as long as Nick Saban is coaching Alabama, he gives them a chance to compete for a national championship, an SEC championship, and gives them the opportunity to be one of the best 2 teams, if not the best team, in college football, year in and year out. They're number 2. Number 3 is Ohio State. Ryan Day coming back as head coach. They won't have C.J. Stroud. But in terms of their recruiting, they're number 6 in the nation. With this recruiting class, they only got 1 5-star, 18 4-star recruits. But they have a lot of receiving weapons. Marvin Harrison, probably the best receiver in the nation. He won't be lost to the NFL draft. He still has to stay at least another year. So Ohio State, I think they're those 3 teams are the 3 best teams in the sport. Those are the 3 teams I think can win a national title every single year for the next 5 years. They are all powerhouses in the sport. Ohio State is my number 3. Number 4, I'm going to have LSU. Brian Kelly is their coach. They have a very nice quarterback. Number 7 in recruiting, in the recruiting rankings for this season, for this upcoming season. They had a very nice year. They obviously got blown out in their SEC championship, but they took care of business against Purdue in the bowl game. And they're always going to recruit well, especially with their head coach and just the history that LSU has. And you look at what they did last year. They were as high as number 5 in their ranking. They beat Alabama. They beat a lot of good opponents, especially down in the SEC. I'd expect them to be a team that's vying for a playoff spot. So they're number 4. Number 5 is USC. They have the best player in college football in Caleb Williams, with one of the best offenses in the sport. And that's going to carry them to a lot of wins. We'll see how they address the defense, though. Their defense was horrible last year for USC. Losing, they are the reason that they lost to Utah twice and Tulane in the Cotton Bowl. All of those games, I mean, you look at it, USC probably should have won those games. First game against Utah in the regular season, USC should have won that game. Defense let them down. Pac-12 championship, that's debatable. Caleb Williams got hurt. But the game against Tulane in the Cotton Bowl, if the defense doesn't allow 1 million points, USC easily wins the Cotton Bowl. With Caleb Williams and that offense, Caleb Williams is going to be the favorite to win the Heisman. He just won it. He's back in college. He's the best player in the sport in college football. So depending on how their defense does, their defense decides their fate. If their defense is good, they're in the playoff. If their defense is bad, they're going to be on the outside looking in once again. They landed the number 3 recruit in the country, Malachi Nelson. The problem is he plays quarterback, and Caleb Williams is going to be there. But they also got 2 of the best wide receiver recruits in the nation. So the offense for USC will be amazing next year. It all just depends on the defensive side of the ball. They're at number 5. Number 6 is Michigan. I think the expectation is that Jim Harbaugh will leave the program. He'll definitely be joining an NFL staff next season as their head coach. But with that, I think they'll still be very good. They'll get either an internal guy to be their next head coach, or they'll go out there and get someone from another program to be the head coach at Michigan. They'll still have J.J. McCarthy, who's a very good quarterback despite his struggles in the Fiesta Bowl. I have Blake Corum coming back. Michigan, I don't think they'll be as good as they were this past season, but they'll still be one of the better teams in the sport. Number 7, I have Florida State. Florida State has a lot of talent on their roster. They have one of the better recruiting classes. They're top 20 at number 20, but they have a lot of talent on that roster. And last season went 10-3. I think they're going to be even better this year. They could be a 1 or a 2 loss school when it's all said and done, down in the ACC, winning that conference possibly. Number 8 is Tennessee. Yes, they lose Hendon Hooker, but the guy they have at quarterback lined up right behind him is very, very special. You saw what they did in the Orange Bowl against Clemson, and they easily took care of Clemson. And throughout the regular season, I know a lot of it was with Hendon Hooker, and they played amazing. They beat Alabama. They beat a lot of the powerhouses down in the SEC, and Joe Milton coming back to play quarterback is going to be a very, very exciting thing to see. Tennessee is going to be amazing. They landed one of the top quarterback recruits in the nation as well. They'll be at number 8 for me. Number 9 is Penn State. Won the Rose Bowl against Utah. I really like Penn State's roster, especially their head coach. And then number 10, I have Clemson. Clemson's fallen down a lot since Trevor Lawrence left the school for the NFL. But they still have Dabo Swinney. They're probably one of the better teams in the ACC over the last 5 to 7 years. And, I mean, you can expect them to be one of the better programs. They've every single year they've had a winning record. They've been the best team in the ACC, despite sometimes not making the playoff. They're always going to be a competitive team and a great team. So Clemson is going to start the season at number 10 for me. So that's my top 10 for the way too early college football rankings. So we'll definitely talk more about college football, later in the year, because we don't have college football until basically August or September. So it'll be a while until we talk about the sport again. So great college football season it was. Let's move on here. Carlos Correa. He's been the story of the baseball offseason for the past few weeks. Opted out of his contract to begin the offseason with the Twins. Signed that 3-year deal, then opt out after every single season. Opts out. The expectation is he's going to get a massive deal, 10 plus, $300 million plus potentially. And he ends up, I don't really know where to start with this because Correa, there's so much happened. The San Francisco Giants were the first team to agree to a deal with Carlos Correa after they lose out on Aaron Judge. They sign him, agree to him. I think, 12 years, $350 million. All of it seems to be good. Carlos Correa is going to be a San Francisco Giant. And then the day of the press conference, it's canceled because of a physical. And then literally the next day, after the press conference was canceled, Carlos Correa signs with the New York Mets, or agrees to a deal with the Mets for $315 million. And then we're looking at, holy crap, the Mets just signed Carlos Correa, Justin Verlander, Kodai Senga. They brought Brandon Nimmo back. Yeah, they lost Jacob deGrom, but the Mets might be the best roster in baseball with the addition of Carlos Correa, who's a Gold Glove shortstop, is now going to move to third base with Francisco Lindor at shortstop, and Jeff McNeil at second base, and Pete Alonso at first base, and Starling Marte, and Mark Canha, and Brandon Nimmo. The Mets might be the best roster in the game. But Correa never actually signed the deal with the Mets because the Mets ended up being scared of the physical with Correa as well. And then just this morning, Carlos Correa goes back to the Twins. 6 years, $200 million, potentially can be $270 million, depending on playing incentives. Carlos Correa signed with, or has agreed to contracts with 3 different teams this offseason, losing money every single time. Ultimately goes back to the Minnesota Twins. When he left the Giants to sign with the Mets, there was a lot of conversation about, did the Giants just mess up? Are the Giants really going to miss out on Aaron Judge and Carlos Correa? And is he really about to go to the Mets? So there was a lot of hate and blame on the Giants. But now you're seeing that the Mets had the same concerns about his physical, and now he has left the Mets, and the Mets, you could say, have missed out on Carlos Correa as well. First of all, with the Giants, we'll find out later on in the next few weeks, as the baseball season does start pretty soon. We'll go through every division, standings predictions, all of that stuff. But the Giants needed Correa. They needed a star. They don't have a star on their roster. The Giants needed Correa more than the other two teams, I think. The Mets, getting Correa was a plus. That was like the cherry on top if the Mets got Carlos Correa. But they don't need Carlos Correa. They have Justin Verlander. They have Lindor. They have so much depth. The Mets might be the best roster in the National League and in all of baseball. So the Mets didn't need him. And him ultimately re-signing with the Twins for 6 years, no opt-outs, no trade clause. For the Twins, they wanted Correa the whole offseason. He was their guy. They loved Carlos Correa. But in terms of how does this improve the Twins ball club? Last season, they were in third place. They won 78 games, 78 and 84. They scored 696 runs. Correa had a nice year with the Twins last season. But the Twins roster, I mean, they are... Okay, the AL Central is a weak division. The Tigers and the Royals might be two of the worst teams in the game. The White Sox had a very disappointing season last year. Who knows if they'll even be competitive enough to win the division. Although they do have some really nice players on the roster. The Guardians won the division last year. They added Josh Bell and Mike Zunino. They have a very good pitching staff with Shane Bieber and Tristan McKenzie. So Cleveland is the favorite to go in and win the division. The Twins roster is not good enough to win the AL Central, despite it being not one of the stronger divisions in the game. On the pitching side of things, Sonny Gray, 34-year-old, he's going to be 34 next season. Tyler Mahle was a great pickup from the Reds. Joe Ryan, what an amazing year he had last season for the Twins. Offensively, Luis Arias, one of the best hitting first baseman, best hitting players in the game. Royce Lewis, top prospect. We'll see if he can even ever touch a big league field. Jorge Polanco is a pretty solid player. They brought in Joey Gallo. The Twins, from what I remember, they struck out, I think it was the most times in the sport last season. And if the Twins want to have success next season, they need to not strike out. So they go out and they get the one guy who's guaranteed three things. He is guaranteed to hit homers, walk, and strike out. And they signed Joey Gallo to a 1-year deal. So they decided to fix their strikeout problem by signing a guy who strikes out. He's either going to strike out, hit a home run, or walk. That's all that Joey Gallo does. For me, and as much as Joey Gallo, defensively, he's one of the best players in the game. Best glove, gold glover, amazing arm. If you could only play a guy on defense and not have him hit, I would do that for Joey Gallo. But the fact that teams keep giving Joey Gallo a chance when all he's going to do at the plate is either hit a home run, walk, or strike out, I think that is a negative asset offensively. I think if I was building a team, I mean, yeah, you can have other guys that do that. Not every guy needs to be what I'm about to say. Not every guy needs to get on base, move runners, put the ball in play, and then obviously hit home runs too. You want to have power. You're not just building a team that doesn't hit home runs and just has contact hitters. But Joey Gallo, for a team that like the Twins that struck out the most in baseball last season, adding a guy that strikes out at one of the highest rates in baseball is a very, very bad decision. So Correa going back there for 6 years. I mean, 6 years is a pretty long time. Correa obviously isn't getting that 10, 11, 12-year deal like he was guaranteed with the Giants or the Mets. But 6 years, the Twins could be a very good team. They have a lot of work to do in the starting rotation. I mean, their pitching rotation is not good. And they need to cut down on the strikeouts if they want to be a team that can win the division next season. Because you're signing Correa, you're hoping for immediate success. And the Twins haven't shown like they want to rebuild. So I think the goal for the Twins is that they want to go out there and win the division next season. I don't really think that's possible based on their current roster construction. Their pitching is horrible. I mean, I'm going to pull up their team stats from last season. We'll start with the pitching for the Minnesota Twins. Last season, in terms of team ERA, the Minnesota Twins ranked 19th with a 3.98, and then offensively, the Twins hit 240, striking out. Striking out at they struck out 1,353 times. It's 19th highest in baseball. So they didn't strike out the most. Actually, the team that struck out the most was the Angels. But the Twins, I just don't think they're going to be good next season. So Correa obviously went back there. He's trying to get a bag. None of the other teams besides the Twins were going to sign him based off of his physical, which is weird. His physical is about an injury he had when he was a minor leaguer, and he has not suffered the injury since he's been in the major leagues. But we'll talk more baseball later on in the week, definitely within the next few episodes, and as we get closer to the start of the regular season, go through each division, give standings predictions, awards predictions, World Series picks, and stuff like that. But that'll do it for today's episode of the franchise. We'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Once again, though, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts is where the franchise is available. We will see you guys on Wednesday with another episode.